Good afternoon, everybody. I noticed that the audience has thinned out considerably after the inaugural session. Presumably, Industry 4.0 and the MBA is perhaps not as gripping as the future of pedagogy itself. Nevertheless, I think that the subject does throw open many interesting lines of inquiry, if I may say, for people like you in the audience who are primarily, teachers of management. Some are, of course, practitioners. The question of relevance is something which is actually fundamental to the field of education itself, particularly higher education. Just 10 days ago, I happened to be in a conversation with Dr. Raghuram Rajan. BusinessLine had invited him for a breakfast and discussion in Chennai on his latest interest, which was basically his mentor and advisor to a new university which is coming up called Kriya University. And they're sort of trying to rethink the basic first university degree. And we did discuss this issue a little bit in detail there as well. The point is that the world is changing so rapidly that when an educational institute, even a very good one, prepares a student for the business of today, by the time that student goes into the marketplace, that business has already changed. So you need to be very, very clear. What are the core skills which are required? How do you make sure that they stay relevant during the course of a person's career? Because you can't. We heard some interesting ideas in the earlier session, so we'll come back to that in the discussion. But this remains the key challenge. When nobody is very clear on what is needed, how do you prepare people to, with the right skills? So that remains the first challenge. I recollect many, many years ago when I was just starting out as a very raw reporter, my then editor, Mr. A.K. Roy of the Economic Times, fine gentleman, he had been invited to deliver the inaugural address at the IIM Lucknow, which was going to start that year. And he asked me to sort of read his speech. And he raised a very, very simple question. He basically asked the students, or would-be students of IIM Lucknow, why are you doing an MBA? Why are you doing an MBA to learn to run a business which you will never own? Because this was 27, 28 years ago, long time ago, maybe closer to 30. At that time, the landscape of business in India was very, very different. It was still dominated by old capital, right? So you had these business families and business houses dominated the enterprise. Then you had a public sector, which the government owned, you didn't. And that was it. Or you had a whole lot of very small scale. That was the era of the celebration of the small enterprise and the attempt at sort of making everything in India. Long before Mr. Modi came up with that phrase, you'll find the remnants of that scattered across the interiors of our country, long dead industrial estates with small sheds, 1,000 square feet sheds and sort of. So that was an experiment at that time. But he asked the question, why are you doing an MBA? Right? What his idea at that time, and he was very perceptive man. And, so maybe, a couple of decades before this whole, 2 or 3 decades before this celebration of the startup started in our country, he wanted to prod students into thinking that way. He says, why do you want to become a knocker in somebody else's business? If you're equipping yourself with the skills to run a business, manage a business, then run your own. That was his challenge. I think that's a kind of, that still remains relevant today. Industry 4.0 is just the latest challenge that business is facing. Basically, it is the convergence of physical and cyber systems. A lot of changes are happening, Internet of Things, Internet of Machines, Internet of Manufacturing. Some of these changes are, quite radical. Again, I'll share an experience I had from my own life. 20 years ago, I happened to be in Chennai at that time as the editor south of the Financial Express. Hyundai Motor had just opened its factory. So I went to see their production line. Very impressive, wonderful, complex-looking machines, thousands of people on the shop floor, right? 20 years later, 25 years later, they said, look, why don't you come? Since you're back in Chennai, come and see the plant, see how it has changed. So I went there, I went to line 2. Line 2 has a higher capacity than the first line, which I had set up 25 years ago. It makes nearly thrice the number of cars per shift that the first line produces. Line 2 had per shift, I think it has 180 people on the shop floor, of whom about 160 are required for regulatory reasons, where they need to watch the manufacturing process so that they can intervene if there is a problem. They are actually doing nothing. It is completely robotized, 99.2% robotized manufacture. They make a car every 3 minutes. And it's a different car. Each one on the assembly line is different. So that is how manufacturing has changed. It's fully integrated with this supply chain, with the vendors. Even the pallet stacking is now robotized because human beings can't keep up with that complexity. So the question is then, when the human element in business is becoming, I won't say irrelevant, but becoming less essential to the continuous process of business. Human beings are still required, of course, like I said, even on a shop floor, they're required to intervene because a human brain can react faster than the fastest computer. So if there is a crisis, they are able to analyze complex factors very quickly and take a decision which sort of reduces risk or damage. And that job still cannot be done by a computer, but almost everything else can be. In this kind of a scenario, what is the kind of leader or manager that businesses of tomorrow require? What are the skills that they need? There is a lot of talk of millennials and digital natives and so on, but familiarity or a comfort level with technology does not translate into understanding of technology, right? So my son, for instance, can, alter the settings on my phone 10 times faster than I can, but I don't think he has the faintest understanding of mobile technology. At least I have, by virtue of being forced to report and write on it, learned a little bit about the basics at least. So there is that, so when you are trying to sort of train the leader of tomorrow, they come in with certain native advantages, but that does not necessarily translate into understanding. So that's one challenge. The second challenge is the challenge of making their skills relevant for industry and making it stay relevant for industry. So how do you do that? How do you future-proof your skills? That's another challenge, because Industry 4.0, in my view, is just a subset of a much larger challenge which is facing industry, and by inference, all the people who are joining it or potential or in it, managers, workers, everybody. And which is that how do you stay relevant when technology processes are changing so quickly and are becoming so complex that they're exceeding human scale. I mean, you keep talking about, I hear the word big data at least 50 times a day, right? My own brother, in fact, is one of the, longest, I think, standing researchers and players in this big data business. He's got a doctorate. I keep asking him, okay, just explain big data to me simply, right? What does it mean? And I haven't got a satisfactory explanation yet. So here you are, as a manager, you're expected to use and leverage big data. As perhaps an enterprise leader, you're making critical investment in business decisions driven allegedly by big data. But do you understand it? Is it even comprehensible by the human mind? The scale and scope of data that and analytics that we're talking about. So has business, that's the other question. So if business is actually growing beyond human scale, right? Cities have grown beyond human scale. You cannot live in a city without a vehicle or access to transportation today, no matter what level you're occupying in the food chain. Even if you're a domestic servant, you can no longer afford to live in the area where you're probably working, so you need to commute. You cannot. Cities have grown beyond human scale. Businesses, in my view, are also growing in scale and complexity beyond the scope of human beings to actually fundamentally grip. They can get handles on bits and pieces of the problem, but perhaps the whole thing is just too complex. But there is the other side to this. The other side is that, if it is a straightforward contest between man and machine, today the machine will win. But man and machine together can beat anything, right? So that really is the opportunity offered by Industry 4.0 to bring the power of the machine, the power of artificial intelligence, the power of technology to assist you and empower you to possibly get a hold of this really complex and changing business environment. And that remains a fundamental managerial challenge no matter which era that you live in. The initial MBAs in this country who passed out in the 70s or the 80s grappled with the same challenge as this year's pass-outs will. So that is really the core fundamental challenge. So how do we sort of address this? How do we make this? How do we deal with this challenge? And particularly, if you're an educator, right? So what is it? What is it that industry wants? How do you design a sort of learning system which delivers that? And how do you sort of make yourself stay relevant? I think these are the key issues. I'm sure our panel, a very eminent panel here, will have many, many more interesting insights to add to this. So I'm going to now fall silent. Round of applause, everybody. He's shutting up. So, and actually let the real experts on the stage speak. I think we'll just simply go in this order of seating, starting with Mr. Moses on my left, and we'll just continue. May I request each speaker to maybe take about 10, 12 minutes, see if to sort of set out your thoughts, and then perhaps we can break into a discussion, maybe ask each other questions as well. And perhaps we'll also welcome interactions from the audience. So, Mr. Moses?